Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything you believed about power was backwards. Imagine discovering that the strength you have been chasing in the world was quietly waiting inside you the entire time. Not in your voice. Not in your achievements. But in your silence. Part 1. The source of power. Most people never learn the truth about silence. They treat it like absence, like emptiness, like a space where nothing meaningful exists. Yet there are a few who learn the secret that silence is not a void. It is the source from which all strength rises. This lesson did not come to me from books or mentors or long nights of planning. It came from watching a single man who changed the entire atmosphere of a room without speaking a word. It happened years ago in a crowded community hall. People filled the space with arguments and opinions. Everyone fought to be the loudest. They pointed fingers. They raised their voices. Some tried to dominate the conversation. Others simply tried to survive it. Yet in the center of that noise sat one man who did not say anything at all. He rested his hands on the table in front of him. His posture was relaxed. His eyes were steady and calm. While everyone else wrestled to be heard, he simply observed. At first no one noticed him. Why would they? He was not speaking. He was not competing. He was not trying to win the room. But slowly the air shifted. One by one voices dropped a little lower. People glanced in his direction. The noise that had filled the room like a storm cloud began to orbit around his silence. Soon everyone was watching him, waiting for him to speak, hoping he would reveal an answer that none of them could find through all their noise. That was the moment I understood something important. Power is not always loud. It is not always visible. It is not the person who speaks the most who leads the room. It is the person who does not let the room control their mind. The man who remained silent was not quiet because he was weak. He was quiet because he did not need to be loud. His silence was not emptiness. It was mastery. Society trains you to believe that influence comes from performance. From speaking quickly. From reacting instantly. You are told that power is in your gestures and decisions and arguments. Yet look deeper. True power does not shout. True power does not rush. True power does not fear the noise of the crowd. It is the discipline to remain unmoved when everything around you tries to pull you off balance. That day I asked the man why he remained quiet. He smiled gently and said only this: "Noise is not truth. Noise is hunger. It chases attention. It chases reaction. But silence needs nothing. Silence already knows its place." His words echoed in my mind. For years I had allowed the world to push me from one reaction to another. News alerts. Arguments. Expectations. Opinions. They all demanded something from me. They tried to drag me into their chaos. They wanted my energy. They wanted my response. They wanted my peace. I believed reacting was part of life. I believed I had no choice. But now I began to see the truth. The noise was not me. It never was. You arrive in this world surrounded by noise. You inherit labels you did not choose and expectations you never asked for. You learn to react long before you learn to understand yourself. You are praised for responding fast even when the response is not wise. You are trained to answer everything even when everything does not deserve an answer. And little by little you lose the most important connection in your life, the connection to your own center. When you react to every sound and every opinion, you spread yourself thin. Your energy becomes scattered. You become exhausted without knowing why. You begin to feel like a stranger in your own life. Yet here is the turning point. True silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of confusion. It is the moment you stop letting the world pull your strings like a puppet. It is the moment you take your mind back. Imagine what happens when you ignore drama that was never yours. Imagine letting the storms of others rage without inviting them into your home. Imagine the freedom of not responding to every interruption, every demand, every argument. When you stop offering your attention to everything that calls your name, you discover something remarkable. You discover space. In that space your real voice appears. Not the voice that shouts over others. Not the voice shaped by fear or insecurity. But the voice beneath all of that. The steady voice that waits patiently for you to return to yourself. That voice is your compass. That voice is your guide. That voice is where your true strength begins. The world wants you frantic and restless. It wants you chasing validation, explaining yourself, defending yourself, reacting instantly. But understand this: power is never found in reaction. Power is found in restraint. A strong mind knows when to act and when not to. A powerful person knows when to speak and when silence speaks louder than words ever could. When you stand firm in your calm, the world loses its control over you. You stop dancing to its drumbeat of urgency and panic. The noise can pound at your door, but you no longer open it. You realize you do not owe the world your reaction. You do not owe anyone your peace. You begin to move through life with clarity and purpose. Your silence becomes your shield. Your calm becomes your strength. And slowly you transform from someone shaped by the chaos around you into someone who shapes their own world from the inside out. In a society obsessed with being loud, you become rare when you learn to be still. You become powerful when you remain grounded. You become untouchable when you stop responding to everything that wants to shake you. You are not the noise. You are not the chaos. You are silence walking. You are the calm center of your own life. You are the one who rises above every storm because you no longer react to every wave. This is the first step toward mastery. This is the beginning of your journey. And it starts with a simple truth. When you hold command over your inner silence, you hold command over your entire world. If you want, I can continue with part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, and part 6, each around 1,000 words and each with a different story. Engaging hook for part 2. What if the thing you are holding on to the tightest is the very thing blocking your vision? What if freedom never begins with gaining more, but with letting go? Today you step into the truth that attachment blinds you, but detachment makes you powerful. Part 2. The power of seeing clearly. Detachment is one of the hardest lessons a person can learn because attachment feels comforting. It feels warm. It feels meaningful. It wraps itself around your longing and whispers that staying is strength. Loyalty feels noble. Hope feels sacred. Endurance feels heroic. But these feelings can become a velvet blindfold. They soften the truth. They hide what is real. They keep you gripping something that no longer has the ability to hold you. I once knew a young woman who stayed in a relationship long after her spirit had begun to crumble. She believed her commitment made her strong. She believed her patience was proof of love. Every time she felt pain, she convinced herself it was a test. She told herself she simply needed to try harder, give more, sacrifice more. She called her suffering devotion. She convinced herself that staying in the struggle meant she was growing. But she was not growing. She was sinking. One afternoon she sat across from me with tired eyes and a trembling voice. She tried to explain why she stayed, but every reason she gave sounded like a story she had told herself many times before. She said she was loyal. She said she saw potential. She said she believed things would change. Yet the more she spoke, the clearer it became that she was attached not to the person, but to the story she had written in her mind. She held on to a wish for reality instead of reality itself. That day she asked me a question that changed her life. She said, "How do I know when it is time to let go?" I told her something simple. When your effort becomes a substitute for truth, it is time to step back. When pain repeats itself, it is not a lesson in resilience. It is often a lesson in blindness. When the weight you carry grows heavier and heavier while the reward remains the same, you are holding on to something that was never meant to carry you. Detachment does not mean abandoning people. It does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean shutting your heart. Detachment means removing the blindfold. It means stepping back just far enough to see what is actually there, not what your hope wants to be there. It means allowing truth to speak louder than fear or longing. And truth always begins with clarity. As she slowly loosened her grip, she began to see patterns she had ignored for years. She saw the compromises that drained her spirit. She felt the cost of every moment she had swallowed her own needs to keep something broken alive. She remembered the freedom she once had before she told herself that love must come from one single source. And the clarity hurt. Clarity always hurts at first. Because it does not just reveal the truth about others. It reveals the truth about ourselves. She saw all the moments she had lied to herself. She saw the times she had ignored her own voice. She saw the storms she had called destiny. She saw every time she traded her peace for the hope that staying a little longer might turn the tide. But in that pain she found something precious. she found sight. And sight is the seed of power. When you see clearly, you choose wisely. You stop grasping. You stop begging. You stop waiting for someone else to hand you the happiness you are capable of creating yourself. You let go of the cup with holes. You put down the rope that burns your hands. You stop calling suffering loyalty. You understand that detachment is not disconnection from life. It is reconnection to truth. Truth never betrays you. Truth never confuses you. Truth never demands that you destroy yourself to keep something alive. From the ground of truth, you rebuild not the fantasy you once chased, but the self you once lost. You no longer build castles in the clouds. You build a home in your own soul. That is where real strength begins. But detachment is not only about people. It is also about moments when others try to provoke you, insult you, or drag you into their chaos. There are times when someone throws their anger at you, hoping you will come down to their level. They want your reaction. They want your fire. They want your peace. They want to own your mood for a moment. This is where detachment becomes your greatest defense. I once watched an older mentor of mine stand before a crowd while a man in the front row hurled insults at him. The man was loud and aggressive. He wanted attention. He wanted control. He wanted to pull the room's focus onto his chaos. Everyone watched to see what the mentor would do. They expected him to react. They expected him to defend himself. But he did not move. He did not glare. He did not argue. He did not even blink. After the man finished shouting, my mentor simply said, "Sir, if you hand me a burning coal, I only get burned if I choose to hold it." The room went silent. The angry man had nothing left to say. The lesson was clear. Reaction is surrender. Reaction is the moment you allow someone else to control your state. Reaction means you let their chaos decide your next move. To be easily provoked is to be easily controlled. You do not need chains to be imprisoned. You only need to let others decide how you feel. But detachment gives you power. It allows you to say, "I choose my ground. I choose my state. I choose my peace. You do not earn my reaction. This is not weakness. This is discipline. This is mastery. You do not retreat. You rise above. Your stillness is not silence. It is a warning. It says, I see your game, but I do not play by your rules. Let others swing wildly at the storm. Let them believe victory is in the noise. You will remain steady. You will remain centered. You will remain sovereign. You are not here to be mastered by anyone's mood, not even your own. You are here to stand where others fall. You are here to keep your center when the world tries to steal it. This is true power. And nothing can touch a person who knows how to see clearly and remain still. Stillness is not emptiness. Stillness is readiness. It is the quiet power that waits for the right moment, the right move, the right purpose. Stillness is strength under perfect control. When you learn to detach, you begin to see. And when you see, you begin to rise. If you want, I can continue with part 3, part 4, part 5, and part 6, all in the same style and around 1,000 words each. Engaging hook part 3. There comes a moment in every person's life when silence becomes more powerful than argument, when stillness becomes more dangerous than anger, and when walking away becomes the first step toward mastery. This is the moment you stop reacting and start rising. Part 3. The silent strength that changes everything. True power is rarely loud. You can see this in nature, in history, and in every person who has learned to master themselves rather than the world around them. Power does not shout. Power does not flail. Power does not burn itself out trying to prove its worth. True power waits. It stands firm. It watches. It prepares. When I was younger, I met a retired martial arts teacher who carried an energy unlike anyone I had ever known. He moved slowly, spoke gently, and carried himself with the posture of someone who had nothing to fear and nothing to prove. One evening after class, he told me a story I have never forgotten. He said that the most dangerous fighter is not the one who swings first. It is the one who never needs to. He explained that mastery looks like calm while everyone else looks like chaos. He said, the real warrior waits. Not because he is afraid, but because he understands timing. He knows that every ounce of strength he saves becomes power multiplied at the right moment. Then he handed me a wooden practice sword and said, "Watch." For several minutes he stood perfectly still, the sword resting lightly against his palm. I waited for him to move. I expected a demonstration, a strike, something to prove his words. But he remained motionless. Finally he said, "Feel this moment. This is not weakness. This is readiness. This is the kind of stillness that terrifies those who depend on noise to feel important. This is the kind of calm that wins before the fight even begins." The memory of him standing like a silent mountain taught me more about power than any lesson after. He reminded me of the lion. The savannah does not tremble because of the lion's roar. It trembles because of its silence. The lion waits. It conserves. It moves only when the moment demands. It does not waste energy chasing what does not matter. Its precision creates fear because it reveals total control. Stillness is not emptiness. Stillness is discipline. Stillness is a mind sharpened to a single point. While others drain their strength reacting to every shift around them, the one who practices stillness gathers strength. The one who observes instead of rushing becomes clearer, wiser, more focused. Stillness turns restraint into strategy. Most people are caught in a storm of motion. They respond to every insult. They chase every opinion. They defend every decision. They move so quickly they forget why they are moving in the first place. Their strength is scattered across a dozen meaningless reactions. They burn out not because life is hard, but because they constantly rush toward battles that never required their presence. You may have lived like this before. You may have exhausted yourself trying to prove your intentions, explain your boundaries, or justify your choices. You may have spent hours defending your truth to people who were never willing to hear it. You may have tried to fix conflicts that others created or mend relationships that only you were holding together. You may have believed that movement meant progress, that noise meant significance, that reacting meant strength. But now you know something different. Now you know that the person who can wait is the person who wins. Now you understand that patience is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the ability to see clearly when everyone else is blinded by emotion. Detachment is part of this lesson. It is not escape. It is not indifference. It is not emotional frost. Detachment is reclaiming your inner world from the grip of anything that drains your energy without returning it. It is the moment you stop pouring your strength into what cannot grow. It is the moment you realize your loyalty to truth matters more than your loyalty to illusion. There comes a moment when the weight of holding on becomes undeniable. It is not aging. It is not fatigue. It is the truth finally revealing itself. You wake up and see the cost of the battles you fought out of obligation rather than purpose. You see the places where you blurred your own boundaries just to keep the peace. You see the moments you told yourself that carrying the entire load meant you were strong, when in reality you were simply attached to the struggle. Letting go is the first act of reclaiming your life. Letting go is not defeat. It is clarity. It is a decision that says, "My energy is sacred." It is a decision that says, "I will not water dead soil." It is a decision that says, "I deserve to grow." People misunderstand detachment because they have never experienced its freedom. They call it coldness because they mistake control for distance. They call it indifference because they do not understand the courage it takes to stop fighting for something that only consumes you. They call it retreat because they cannot see the strength it takes to walk away with dignity. But you know the truth. Detachment is a controlled burn. It is removing what no longer nourishes you so that your strength can return to the places that matter. It is cutting away not out of anger, but out of self-respect. It is stepping back so you can stand tall again. It is removing your heart from situations that ask you to shrink in order to stay. When you release what you cannot control, your hands become free. Free to build. Free to heal. Free to create. Free to hold what is real. You reclaim your power by refusing to waste it. You lower the world's volume so you can hear the wisdom that has always been inside you. And in that sacred silence, you rise. As you rise, you learn the art of discernment. You realize that not every argument deserves your voice. You learn that not every accusation requires your defense. You discover that your mind is a sanctuary, not a stage for noise or drama. This is how you become unshakable. This is how you become difficult to manipulate, impossible to guilt, immune to the tactics that once pulled you into chaos. When you no longer need approval, you become free. When you no longer fear silence, you become powerful. When you no longer explain yourself to those who refuse to understand you, you become untouchable. There is profound strength in saying nothing. The less you explain, the more you command. There comes a point when explaining yourself feels like pouring water into sand. The effort disappears. The message vanishes. Not because you are unclear, but because they are unwilling. That is when you stop explaining and start living. You make your choices with quiet conviction. You protect your energy without apology. You let your silence carry the weight of your truth. And your silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. People respect what they cannot predict. They respect the one who remains calm while they lose control. They respect the one who does not play the same emotional games. Your silence becomes your shield. Your stillness becomes your strategy. Your presence becomes your power. And the moment your reactions disappear, your influence begins. If you want, I can continue with part 4, part 5, and part 6, all in the same motivational style. Engaging hook. There comes a moment in every person's life when the ground beneath them shifts, not because the world has changed, but because they finally have. It is the moment when you look at your own reflection and recognize that the person staring back is no longer willing to be dragged, drained, or defined by anything that keeps them small. That moment is the beginning of real power. Part 4. The power of release. Jake Harper had spent most of his adult life fighting battles that were never his. Arguments he didn't start. Responsibilities he didn't choose. Expectations he never agreed to. He thought this was strength, being loyal, being tough, carrying weight without complaining. But loyalty without limits becomes a kind of quiet self-destruction, the type that drains a person long before they realize they are empty. It wasn't until the night he sat alone in his truck after another long argument with people who never truly listened that something inside him cracked. Not loudly. Not violently. It was more like a soft break, the kind you don't hear but feel in your chest. He stared at the dashboard, feeling the familiar mix of frustration and exhaustion, and suddenly a simple truth rose inside him so clearly it was impossible to ignore. He was giving his life to things that were giving nothing back. That was the night Jake discovered the first lesson of release. Letting go is not losing. It is reclaiming. The next morning, he did something he had never done before. He stayed silent. No explanations. No defending himself. No rehearsed speeches to justify his decisions. He simply removed himself from the conversations that drained him. For the first time in years, he sat with his coffee on the porch and listened to the world around him, the birds, the breeze, the simple hum of life moving without expectation. And in that stillness, he felt something he had almost forgotten: peace. Jake had read Napoleon Hill's work before, but now his words hit different. Energy goes where it is invited and stays where it is respected. Jake realized he had been pouring his energy into cracks, not containers. Into situations that leaked, relationships that drained, and obligations that grew heavier the more he carried them. Success, Hill taught, requires direction. Not every battle deserves your sword. Not every voice deserves your response. As days passed, people noticed the shift in him. Some grew uncomfortable. Others became irritated. They were used to the old Jake, the one who explained himself endlessly, who carried guilt that wasn't his, who rushed to fix problems he didn't create. Now he wasn't reacting the way they expected. He wasn't giving the long explanations they demanded. He wasn't stepping into storms he didn't cause. He was simply present, calm, steady, unmoved. This silence, he discovered, was its own kind of force. One afternoon, a coworker approached him with a complaint, something petty, something that months ago would have pulled Jake into a long conversation filled with apologies and explanations. But Jake just listened, nodded once, and said, "I understand." Nothing more. No defense. No debate. No emotional tug-of-war. The coworker stood there stunned. Without Jake's usual explanations to push against, the complaint suddenly felt small, even unnecessary. Jake walked away feeling lighter than he had in years. Napoleon Hill wrote that success demands self-mastery, the ability to control your emotions, your reactions, and your focus. Jake was finally beginning to understand what that looked like in real life. It wasn't about winning arguments or proving his point. It was about owning his energy and choosing where it went. When Jake stopped explaining himself, the world around him changed. People who had once drained him suddenly kept their distance. People who valued him began to rise closer. The noise around him faded, and in its place grew a quiet conviction, a sense that he was no longer living on other people's terms. He found himself thinking more clearly. His goals returned to the center of his life, goals he had pushed aside for years while trying to keep everyone else happy. He began spending his evenings differently, reading again, planning again, dreaming again. It was like rediscovering an old map, one he forgot he owned, the map of his own life. Detachment, he realized, was not coldness. It was clarity. It was choosing truth over illusion. It was choosing peace over chaos. It was choosing growth over guilt. Jake remembered something Hill wrote about: the mind, it is a garden. What you water grows. For years he had watered weeds, distractions, negative voices, unnecessary battles. Now he was pulling those weeds out, one by one. Not angrily, but intentionally. And something remarkable began to happen. People started respecting him not because he demanded it, but because he no longer chased approval. His silence made his presence heavier. His decisions became final, not open for negotiation. When he spoke, people listened because his words were no longer scattered everywhere. They were precise, rare, and backed by action. One evening, Jake sat on that same porch where his transformation began. The sky was turning gold, the world slowing down, and he realized that release had not taken anything from him. It had given everything back: his time, his focus, his strength, his direction. He whispered to himself, as if speaking to an older version he had finally outgrown. I'm not letting go to escape. I'm letting go to rise. And in that moment he understood the truth every powerful person eventually learns: when you stop explaining, you stop shrinking. When you release what weakens you, you step into what strengthens you. And when you detach from what drains you, you finally become available to what can build you. This was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new kind of power, the kind that grows in silence, stands in truth, and moves only with purpose. And Jake Harper was finally ready. Engaging hook. There comes a turning point in every person's life when they finally realize that the future does not belong to the loudest, the busiest, or the most reactive. It belongs to the one who learns to guard their inner world with the same discipline a warrior uses to protect his blade. That turning point is where transformation truly begins. Part 5. The fortress within. Jake Harper stood at a place he had never reached before, a quiet strength that felt unfamiliar but powerful. He had spent years reacting to everything life threw at him, every insult, every demand, every expectation. Now he found himself doing something completely new. He was choosing what deserved his attention. It was not easy at first. Silence often felt heavy. Detachment felt strange. But the more he practiced it, the clearer his mind became. Napoleon Hill wrote that the greatest battles are not fought in the world but in the mind. Jake began to understand this every morning when he woke up and felt that small pull, the desire to explain himself to someone, to argue back, to defend a decision he knew was right. It was an old habit, a familiar chain. But he did not follow it this time. He sat with his coffee on the same porch where so many of his turning points had begun, breathing slowly, reclaiming his focus before anyone else could claim it for him. One afternoon, Jake received a message from someone who had once known exactly how to push him into emotional storms. It was the kind of message that used to pull him into long arguments and emotional exhaustion. But this time, Jake did not respond to explain or defend. He simply said, "Noted," and put his phone aside. No anger. No fear. Just a firm boundary, and something unexpected happened inside him. He felt powerful not because he had won anything, but because he had refused to lose pieces of himself. Hill had written that self-control is the pathway to mastery. Jake felt that truth settle in him like a stone. He was no longer playing the game of constant reaction. He was playing a different game, the game of command. The people around him reacted to this shift. Some backed away, unsure of how to approach the new version of him. Others grew irritated, uncomfortable with a Jake who no longer bent, apologized, or chased. A few, surprisingly, grew more respectful. His silence carried weight. His decisions became clearer. His presence felt different, steady, grounded, unshakable. But there was one person who struggled with this new strength: Jake's old self. That version of him still whispered doubts in the back of his mind. Are you being too cold? What if they misunderstand you? What if they get angry? Those voices came from years of over-explaining, years of wanting to avoid conflict by losing himself. Jake had to confront them with honesty. One evening, while driving home from work, he pulled over at a quiet park. He stepped out of the car and walked to a bench under an old oak tree. He sat down and let the silence settle. He asked himself a question he had avoided for years. What am I really afraid of losing? And the answer came not in words but in a feeling. He had been afraid of losing approval. Afraid of losing connections that drained him. Afraid of losing people who only stayed when he was small. But then he remembered something Hill once wrote: you cannot possess greatness while clinging to what keeps you ordinary. Jake realized he had been giving power to things that weakened him. And the moment that truth became clear, something inside him shifted. His fear began to dissolve. In its place grew a calm, steady certainty. The following week brought a test. A situation at work spiraled into tension. Voices rose. Accusations were thrown. People looked at Jake expecting him to step forward, take the blame, smooth everything out like he always did. But he stayed quiet. He listened. He observed. When he finally spoke, his voice was even and clear. This isn't mine to carry. The room fell silent. It was the first time he had said those words in his life. They felt like a doorway cracking open. After that moment, something remarkable happened. The emotional storms around him no longer pulled him in. The drama that once consumed him now passed by like distant thunder. People stopped expecting him to be the emotional shock absorber. They began solving their own issues. They approached him with respect, not entitlement. Jake realized that when you become steady, you become selective. When you become selective, you become powerful. And when you become powerful, chaos does not get near you unless you allow it. Napoleon Hill often wrote that your greatest asset is a disciplined mind. Jake experienced this firsthand. His days became smoother. His nights became calmer. He had more energy for things that mattered: building skills, reading, planning, dreaming. He no longer wasted his strength on debates that led nowhere or explanations that changed nothing. He chose his battles, and more importantly, he chose his peace. One Sunday morning, Jake stood looking at himself in the mirror, not the tired, drained version he had known for years, but a man who had reclaimed his presence. A man who understood that power is not loud. Power is not frantic. Power is not desperate. Power is disciplined. He whispered to himself. I don't need to be understood to be strong. It felt true in a way it never had before. Jake walked outside and felt the cold breeze on his face. Life had not suddenly become easy. Problems still existed. Challenges still appeared. People still tried to provoke him. But the difference was inside him. His inner world had become a fortress. A place built not of walls but of boundaries. Not of silence but of clarity. Not of coldness but of purpose. He understood now that those who guard their energy rise faster. Those who master their emotions stand firmer. And those who stop explaining themselves gain a power that cannot be taken away. Jake stepped forward into the new day with quiet conviction. He knew he was not finished growing. He knew more tests would come. But he also knew the man he was becoming was stronger than any storm ahead. And as he walked toward the future, he carried with him a truth Napoleon Hill spent a lifetime teaching: the mind that learns to command itself becomes unstoppable. Jake Harper was finally learning to command his engaging hook. There comes a moment in every transformation when you stop searching for power outside yourself and finally recognize that the strength you were chasing has been inside you the whole time. It is the moment when the old version of you steps aside and the person you were always meant to become steps forward. Part 6. The Unshakable Self. Jake Harper woke before dawn on a quiet Sunday morning. Something in the air felt different, as if the world were holding its breath. For years he had lived on the edge of his emotions, pulled, pushed, shaken by everyone and everything around him. But now, standing in the pale blue light of early morning, he felt something he had never felt before: a deep stillness inside, a clarity so sharp it almost startled him. He walked to the kitchen, made his coffee, and leaned against the counter as the warm steam rose. In that simple moment he realized he no longer needed the world's approval or permission to feel whole. He no longer needed to explain what he felt or justify why he had changed. He had become someone he respected, and that was enough. Napoleon Hill wrote that every great transformation begins with a single decision: the decision to take ownership of your own mind. Jake had made that decision weeks ago, and now it was unfolding through every part of his life. What had started as small acts of silence and restraint had grown into a new identity built with intention rather than reaction. The shift became even more visible when Jake met his old friend Marcus for lunch. Marcus had always been loud and quick to judge. He noticed immediately that Jake was not the same. He poked, teased, pressed the old buttons he used to press. But Jake didn't rise. He didn't explain, argue, or justify. He simply listened and responded calmly only when something truly required a response. Marcus leaned back in his chair, confused. "Man, what happened to you? You're different." Jake smiled, took a sip of water, and said, "I stopped giving my power away." It was a simple sentence, but it carried years of lessons. Marcus laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But Jake's calm, grounded presence made the truth undeniable. For the first time, Marcus saw what power looked like without aggression, without noise, without emotional chaos. It was quiet, centered, and impossible to shake out. A week later, Jake faced a situation that would have broken the old version of him. A project at work fell apart. A coworker blamed him unfairly. In the past, Jake would have rushed to defend himself, arguing, explaining, justifying. But now he simply stated the facts, took responsibility only for what he had truly done, and let the truth speak for itself. He walked out of the room steady, unbothered, unchained, and something remarkable happened. His boss, who had always overlooked him, approached him later and said, "I don't know what you're doing differently, but you're becoming someone people listen to." Jake felt a deep truth settle inside him. Hill's words echoed in his mind: you attract respect when you learn to respect your own energy. He understood now that growth was not loud. Growth was not dramatic. Growth was the quiet rebuilding of the inner self, one disciplined choice at a time. Later that month, Jake returned to the lake where his journey had begun. It was the same place he had once sat, overwhelmed by life, desperate for answers. But now he stood tall on the same shore, breathing in the cool air, aware of how far he had come. He felt steady, present. He thought about the man he used to be, the one who chased approval, who explained himself endlessly, who reacted to every provocation, who held on to things that drained him. That version of him felt like a ghost now, fading in the distance. Jake didn't hate that old self. He felt gratitude for him. That man had carried him through storms, even if clumsily. That man had taught him the cost of staying small. That man had brought him to the starting point of transformation. But now, Jake was ready for something bigger, a life lived with intention instead of fear. Hill often said that the greatest asset any human can develop is a mind disciplined enough to remain calm when others panic, steady when others break, silent when others lash out. Jake felt that discipline in his bones now. It wasn't perfect. He wasn't perfect. But he was no longer ruled by reaction. He was ruled by purpose. As he sat by the lake, he made one final promise to himself. My life belongs to me now. I will not hand it over to noise, to fear, to guilt, to anyone or anything that tries to claim my peace. That promise was the final piece of the transformation. From that day on, Jake moved through the world differently. He didn't rush. He didn't chase. He didn't explain unless it mattered. He didn't react unless it served him. His silence became stronger than his words. His boundaries became clearer than his explanations. His presence became sharper than any argument he could make. People noticed. They respected him not out of fear, but because they felt the depth of his inner command. They sensed that Jake had become a man who stood on solid ground, a man who could not be pushed into emotional storms, a man who had mastered the art. Napoleon Hill spent a lifetime teaching the art of ruling your own mind before the world ever gets a chance to rule it for you. Jake Harper had become that rare kind of person, strong, centered, unshakable, not because life became easier, but because he finally learned where true power comes from. And that is where his journey ends, not with noise, but with clarity. Not with fireworks, but with inner fire. Not with victory over others, but victory over himself. If you felt inspired by this journey, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories. Share this with someone who needs it. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here.